Human impregnated the ugly daughters of the Star Emperor. Senate is stunned. Jackson Riker sat nervously on the transport shuttle, staring out the window as it glided through the cold expanse of space. The stars flickered outside like tiny diamonds scattered across black velvet. He had been sent to the Star Empire as part of a diplomatic mission, a task that was supposed to be routine but had quickly become anything but. The human race had recently made significant strides in technology and exploration, and with these advancements came opportunities for alliances with other intergalactic powers. The Star Empire, a massive and powerful regime, had been on the list of potential allies. Now Jackson was here to solidify that bond, to open the door for a more peaceful future for humanity. Or so he thought. As the shuttle entered the atmosphere of the Star Emperor's homeworld, Jackson couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The planet known as Zorn was a shining jewel, its cities sprawling with technology, its sky a deep, eternal blue. Yet, despite its beauty, there was an undercurrent of tension in the air. The Emperor's rule was absolute, and there were whispers of unrest from those who felt stifled by the ancient customs that still held sway over this galactic empire. Jackson shook his head, clearing his thoughts as the shuttle descended. He was here for business, not politics. His mission was simple: convince the Star Emperor's court that an alliance with humanity was a mutually beneficial arrangement. But the situation was more complicated than he had anticipated. As soon as Jackson disembarked, he was escorted by royal guards to the palace. It was a grand building, built with such precision that it seemed to reflect the grandeur and power of the empire itself. The walls shimmered with strange, alien materials, and the air inside was thick with an almost palpable sense of history. Yet the most important part of the palace, the emperor's inner chambers, was still some distance away. The royal palace had been designed to reflect the imperial family's ancient lineage. The Star Emperor's lineage had ruled for generations, and their power was undeniable. The emperor himself was an imposing figure, tall, with a face marked by years of cruel rule. He was a being of immense strength and influence, and his word was law throughout the empire. But today, Jackson was not here to meet the emperor. He had come to meet his daughters. The royal family, like many powerful dynasties, had a strict code of conduct. The daughters of the Star Emperor were not seen as figures of affection or admiration. Instead, they were considered tools, strategic pawns to ensure political stability and strengthen the emperor's rule. The emperor's daughters were considered ugly by galactic standards, an unfortunate truth that had become a constant point of mockery among other alien species. But this ugliness was more than just physical. It was a cultural stigma that ran deep in the empire. Jackson had heard the rumors, of course. The emperor's daughters were not the beauty queens of the universe, and they were often the subject of ridicule. But he had no time to dwell on gossip. His mission was to form a bond between humanity and the empire, and that meant respecting their customs and traditions. He had no intention of engaging in personal matters. After all, he was here as a diplomat, not as a tourist. When he entered the royal chambers, he was met by the emperor's first daughter, Ziara. She was seated on a high platform, her eyes calm but sharp. Unlike what Jackson had imagined, her appearance was far from unattractive. Her skin was a deep greenish hue, with dark markings that stretched down her cheeks, and her eyes were a piercing shade of violet. Though her features were alien and unfamiliar to Jackson, they were striking in their own right. She looked at him with a neutral expression, neither friendly nor hostile. Her gaze was measured, as though she had already sized him up the moment he entered the room. "You are the human diplomat, Jackson Riker," she said, her voice cool but not unkind. "I've heard a great deal about you." Jackson nodded, extending a hand. "It's an honor to meet you, Princess Ziara." Ziara did not take his hand. Instead, she studied him for a moment before turning her attention to the room around them. "The honor is mine, Mr. Riker. My father has heard of your intentions. However, his trust is not easily earned." Jackson swallowed, trying to hide his discomfort. He was used to dealing with difficult political situations, but this felt different. The air was thick with an energy that was impossible to ignore. "I understand," he said, "but I assure you I come in peace. Humanity seeks an alliance, one built on mutual respect." Ziara's eyes narrowed slightly. "Mutual respect," she repeated, as though the words tasted foreign to her. "In the Star Empire, there is no respect for those who do not bow to the will of the Emperor." Jackson could tell there was something more behind her words, something deeper. Despite the formalities, he sensed a layer of anger, a frustration that was barely hidden beneath her composed exterior. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "but that is why we need to change things. A new alliance means a new beginning, one where both sides can prosper." Ziara regarded him silently for a moment. "You have a great deal of faith in the potential of diplomacy, Mr. Riker," she said. "But this is not a simple matter of negotiation. The Emperor has rules, he has laws. And those laws will not be broken, not for your people, and certainly not for us." There was a bitterness in her voice now, one that Jackson couldn't ignore. He had expected the formalities, the cold reception, but this was different. Something about Ziara made him feel as though he were dealing with more than just a princess. There was a fire within her, one that didn't easily fade. Before he could respond, the door to the chamber opened, and another of the Emperor's daughters entered. This one was smaller, with scales that shimmered silver in the dim light. She, too, had sharp, violet eyes, though her expression was more playful than her sister S. "The human is here, Ziara?" she asked, her tone light and teasing. "You didn't waste any time." Ziara shot her a sharp look. "Watch your words, sister." The younger princess simply laughed, ignoring her sister's glare. "I'm just saying it's a bit much, don't you think? A human coming all this way, acting like he can change things in our empire." Jackson found himself caught between the two sisters, unsure of how to proceed. He had expected the diplomatic meeting to be straightforward, but this was beginning to feel like something entirely different. He wasn't sure what was going on between the princesses, but it was clear that things were not as simple as he had hoped. "Perhaps you're right," Jackson said, trying to regain control of the situation. "But I truly believe that together we can do something great. Humanity can help the Empire flourish in ways you've never imagined." Ziara's expression softened for a moment. "We shall see, Mr. Riker," she said quietly. "We shall see." The following days were filled with tense meetings, where Jackson Riker found himself struggling to navigate the customs and expectations of the Star Empire. The Emperor, still furious over the human diplomat's boldness, insisted that Jackson meet with the various royal advisors, each one more traditional than the last. The Emperor himself remained silent, his figure looming like a dark shadow over the proceedings. His silence only added to the weight of the task before Jackson, who had come to this distant world with the hope of forming an alliance, but now found himself questioning whether it was even possible. Jackson had spent many hours with Ziara, discussing the potential benefits of a human Star Empire alliance. She was sharp, always questioning his every move, challenging him to think beyond what he had been taught about the Empire's power. Though she was distant and cold at first, there was something about her that intrigued him. Beneath the political persona, Jackson could see a woman who desired more than her father's control, more than the Empire's stifling traditions. It was during one of their late-night discussions that something unexpected happened. Jackson was sitting across from Ziara in a private chamber within the palace, the air thick with the scent of incense and strange, alien flowers. They had been talking for hours, the conversation shifting from politics to personal reflections. Ziara had just finished explaining her frustrations with the limitations placed on her as the daughter of the Emperor. She described how her life had been dictated by the whims of her father, how she was nothing more than a tool to secure power for him, a pawn in a game she never wanted to play. Jackson listened intently, his eyes softening as he understood the depth of her feelings. It was then, without warning, that she reached across the table, her hand brushing against his. The touch was electric, a shock that neither of them had expected. For a moment the room seemed to disappear, and all that was left was the space between them, filled with unspoken words and emotions. "Jackson," Ziara whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Do you ever wonder if we're more than what the Empire says we are?" Jackson's heart raced. He had known Ziara to be strong and composed, but there was a vulnerability in her now that he had never seen before. His mind raced with the implications of what was happening, but in that moment, none of it seemed to matter. He didn't answer her with words. He simply reached forward, taking her hand into his, the contact a silent acknowledgement of the connection between them. "What if I told you," Jackson said softly, his voice low, "that I see you for who you truly are, not the role you've been forced to play?" Ziara's eyes flickered, and for a moment she looked away. The walls she had built around herself began to crumble piece by piece. She was no longer the cold, distant princess, and Jackson was no longer just a diplomat. They were two beings, caught in a moment neither of them had planned for. Before Ziara could respond, the door to the chamber suddenly opened and a royal servant entered, his eyes wide with surprise. The moment was broken. "Your Highness," the servant said, bowing deeply, "the Emperor requests your presence immediately." Ziara quickly withdrew her hand from Jackson's, her expression returning to its usual coldness. "I will be there shortly," she replied, her voice steady once more. She stood up from the table, her regal posture returning as she dismissed the servant. Jackson sat there, his heart still racing. What had just happened? He had come to Zorn with the sole purpose of diplomacy, but now he was entangled in something far more complex. The connection he had felt with her was undeniable, but he knew that it could lead to nothing good. If the Emperor found out, it would destroy any hope for a peaceful alliance. But could he ignore the pull he felt toward Ziara? Could he walk away from what might be the only chance to change the Empire? As Ziara turned to leave the room, she paused in the doorway, her back to him. "This is not what I expected, Jackson," she said quietly, almost as though speaking to herself. "I thought I could resist, but now I'm not so sure." Jackson stood, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to resist. If there's a chance, we can find a way together." Ziara did not respond. Instead, she walked out, the door closing softly behind her. Jackson remained standing in the center of the room, feeling a strange mixture of excitement and dread. The political storm he had entered was only growing stronger, and he had no idea where it would lead. The next morning, the atmosphere in the palace had shifted. Word had spread quickly about the private meeting between Jackson and Ziara. It wasn't long before the royal court began to whisper, their conversations laced with curiosity and judgment. Jackson had done his best to maintain his composure, but he could feel the eyes of the court upon him, scrutinizing his every move. The Emperor, however, remained silent on the matter. Jackson knew that the Emperor's silence was just as dangerous as any wrath. The ruler of the Star Empire was not a man who allowed things to slip from his control. His temper, though rarely shown, was something that could not be underestimated. Jackson sat in the grand hall of the palace, waiting for his audience with the Emperor. He had prepared himself for this moment, rehearsing his words over and over in his mind. He knew that the future of his mission, and possibly his life, depended on what happened in this room. When the Emperor finally entered, his presence filled the room like a storm. He was a tall, imposing figure, with a face that could have been carved from stone. His sharp eyes scanned the room before settling on Jackson, who stood at attention. "You are bold human," the Emperor said, his voice deep and commanding. "Bold to come into my court and speak of alliances, bold to speak to my daughters as if they are equals. But tell me, Riker, what is it that you truly want from me?" Jackson felt the weight of the question hanging in the air. His mind raced, but he spoke the truth. "I seek an alliance, Your Majesty, an alliance based on mutual respect and understanding. Humanity has a lot to offer, but we cannot do it alone. We need partners, and the Star Empire is the most powerful force in the galaxy. Together, we could achieve great things." The Emperor's eyes narrowed. "Respect. Understanding." His laughter was low, but it carried a sharp edge. "Do you think you can come into my domain and change the way things have been for millennia? Do you think you can change the nature of my daughters?" Jackson stood his ground, refusing to back down. "I believe change is possible, but only if we stop seeing each other as tools to be used. The daughters of the Emperor are more than just pawns in your political game. They deserve to have their voices heard." The Emperor's face darkened, his eyes flashing with rage. "You speak of things you do not understand, human. You have no idea what it means to rule an empire." "I don't, Your Majesty," Jackson replied, his voice calm. "But I know what it means to be human, and I believe that even the most powerful empires can be changed for the better." The Emperor's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer before he turned away. "We shall see, Riker. We shall see." With that, the meeting ended, but Jackson knew that the path he had chosen was far from clear. The Emperor was not a man who forgave easily, and the fate of the alliance hung in the balance. The days following the tense meeting with the Emperor were filled with uncertainty. Jackson Riker knew he had stirred the pot in ways that he hadn't fully anticipated. The Emperor's glare had burned into him throughout the entire conversation, leaving him with the clear understanding that there would be consequences for his words. Yet, as much as Jackson had tried to act diplomatically, A part of him couldn't help but wonder if this was the moment of truth, the moment that would either make or break humanity's future in the galaxy. Jackson spent most of the following days in his private quarters, poring over documents and reports about the Star Empire. His mind raced with the implications of the Emperor's reactions. His diplomatic mission had shifted from merely securing an alliance to navigating a political minefield. Yet, as challenging as the situation was, Jackson couldn't stop thinking about Ziara. Since their unexpected moment in the private chamber, she had become more distant. Her cold demeanor had returned, and she had avoided direct conversations with him, even when they were in the same room. Jackson understood why, but it didn't make the distance between them any easier. He had never expected his mission to take such a personal turn, and now he was forced to reconcile the attraction he felt for her with the responsibilities that came with his position. Despite this tension, Jackson continued to meet with various members of the Emperor's court. The royal advisors, though polite on the surface, clearly saw him as a foreigner who didn't understand the intricacies of the empire. They were eager to remind him of his place in their political world, always careful to show that their loyalty was first and foremost to the Emperor. Yet Jackson had learned something crucial during these meetings. The Star Empire's future wasn't as secure as it seemed. Whispers of rebellion had started to circulate, not just among the lower classes, but also among the elite. The Emperor's unyielding grip on power was beginning to crack. One evening, after a long day of negotiations and discussions, Jackson found himself once again standing before the door to Ziara's private quarters. He had avoided her for the past few days, but he knew that avoiding the truth would only make things worse. If there was any chance of changing the fate of this alliance, he needed to talk to her again. He needed to understand where she stood, both as a princess and as a person. He knocked softly, the sound echoing in the quiet hall. There was a brief pause before the door opened, and Ziara stood before him, her expression unreadable. Her sharp violet eyes locked onto his, and for a moment neither of them said anything. "What do you want, Riker?" she asked, her voice cool, but there was a hint of something else beneath the surface, something Jackson couldn't quite place. "I need to talk to you," Jackson said. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything he had been feeling in the past few days. He didn't know what would come of this conversation, but he knew he had to try. Ziara stepped aside, allowing him to enter. The room was dimly lit, with strange alien artifacts scattered around, adding to the sense of mystique that surrounded the princess. She moved to a chair by the window, her posture regal as always. Jackson sat across from her, though the distance between them seemed much greater than it had been before. "I know things have been complicated," Jackson began, choosing his words carefully. "I didn't come here to make things difficult, Ziara. I came here to help." Ziara didn't respond right away. Instead, she stared out the window, her expression thoughtful. After a long silence, she finally spoke. "You're right, things are complicated," she said quietly. "But it's not just about what you want, Jackson. It's about what I want, too. I've spent my entire life being used as a political tool. My father treats me as a pawn, and I know that everyone around me sees me that way. But what do I get from all of this? What do I want?" Jackson leaned forward, his voice sincere. "You deserve more than that. You're not just a princess in a cage. You have the power to change things if you choose to." Ziara's eyes flicked to him, a hint of something softening in her gaze. "And what if I don't want to change things? What if I just want to be free?" Jackson felt a pang in his chest. "You don't have to do it alone. We could work together. Humanity could help you if you just give us the chance." For a moment, Ziara didn't say anything. The silence between them was heavy, each one lost in their own thoughts. Then Ziara stood up abruptly, her voice growing firmer. "I don't know if I can trust you, Jackson," she said, turning her back to him. "I don't know if I can trust anyone anymore. The Empire is a beast. It's built on lies and power, and there's no place for someone like me to be anything other than a tool." Jackson stood as well, his frustration building. "That's exactly what I want to change. I don't want to just be some politician. I don't want us to be some symbol of power. I want a partnership. I want to build something that lasts." Ziara turned to face him then, her eyes sharp and full of emotion. "And you think I can just throw everything away? I am the Emperor's daughter. Everything I've been taught says that I'm nothing more than a piece in a larger game. You want me to abandon all of that?" Jackson took a step closer, his voice calm but firm. You have the power to change it, Ziara. You don't have to play that game anymore. You don't have to be his pawn. There was a long pause, and for the first time, Jackson saw something in Ziara's eyes that wasn't anger or indifference. There was fear, a fear of losing everything she had ever known. But there was something else, too, a flicker of hope, a desire for something more than the life she had been forced to live. Finally, Ziara spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what I'm doing anymore, Jackson. I don't know if I can trust you or anyone. But I want to believe that there's a chance for something different, something better. Jackson's heart raced as he took another step forward. Then trust me, trust humanity, we'll help you, we'll help each other. Ziara didn't answer right away. She just stood there looking at him as if trying to read his every thought. Then, without a word, she walked past him and opened the door to the corridor. I need time, she said, her voice soft but resolute. We'll talk again soon, but for now I need to think. Jackson nodded, though his chest felt heavy with uncertainty. As he walked out of the room, he knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but something had shifted between them, something he couldn't ignore. He had seen the glimmer of hope in Ziara's eyes, and he believed that they could change the course of the Empire, together. Days turned into weeks, and the tension in the palace only grew. Jackson Riker found himself caught between his duty as a diplomat and his growing connection to Ziara. He had come to Zorn with the goal of securing a peaceful alliance between humanity and the Star Empire, but now he found himself questioning everything. What was once a clear mission had become a complex puzzle, with pieces he wasn't sure how to fit together. The Emperor had not spoken directly to Jackson since their heated exchange, but the whispers among the court were enough to show that the ruler was far from pleased. His silence, as it often did, carried a weight more powerful than words. Jackson could feel the eyes of the Emperor's advisors on him, watching his every move, trying to read him, to figure out if he was truly a threat, or if he was just another diplomat caught up in a political game. Meanwhile, Ziara had remained distant. Though their conversation had been meaningful, she had withdrawn back into herself, as if trying to build walls between them once again. Jackson understood her hesitation, but it didn't make it any easier. He had tried reaching out to her several times, only to be met with polite but curt replies. She had become a puzzle he couldn't quite solve, a mystery that only seemed to deepen with each passing day. One afternoon, as Jackson walked through the palace's grand hall, he caught a glimpse of Ziara. She was standing by a large window, looking out over the sprawling city below. Her posture was regal, but there was a sadness in her expression that he couldn't ignore. He paused for a moment, debating whether to approach her, but before he could make up his mind, she turned and caught sight of him. Jackson, she said, her voice calm but strained. We need to talk. Jackson's heart raced as he stepped closer to her. He hadn't expected this. He had thought she would remain distant, but now she was offering him a chance to finally speak openly. He nodded and gestured for her to lead the way. Ziara walked silently, and Jackson followed her down a series of corridors until they reached a private courtyard, a place secluded from the eyes of the court. It was quiet here, with only the sound of distant wind chimes in the background. Ziara stopped near a stone bench and turned to face him. Her eyes were soft, but there was an underlying strength in them that had always been there. It was the same strength that had driven her to defy her father, to speak openly about the power she wished to have over her own life. I've been thinking, she began, her voice steady but her words weighed down by the gravity of the situation. I've been thinking about what you said, about changing things, about freeing myself from the life I've been forced to live. Jackson remained silent, waiting for her to continue. He had no idea where this conversation would lead, but he knew it was important. More important than anything he had said to the Emperor or anyone else. I've spent my whole life being told what to do, Ziara continued, her voice tinged with bitterness. I've been raised to believe that I'm nothing more than a tool. A tool to maintain my father's power, a tool to keep the Empire strong. But what if I'm not just a tool? What if I'm more than that? Jackson stepped closer to her, his voice soft but insistent. You are more than that, Ziara. You have the power to shape your own future. You don't have to be a pawn in your father's game. You have a choice. Ziara looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if looking for something she couldn't find. But what choice do I have? My father controls everything. He controls the Empire, he controls me, and he will never let me go. I'm bound by tradition, by duty, by everything that has been set before me. If I defy him, I lose everything. I lose my position, my power, my life as I know it. Jackson shook his head. You don't have to lose everything. You can take control of your own life. You can decide what happens next. You don't have to be trapped in a life that was decided for you. Ziara remained quiet, her gaze drifting to the horizon. The wind blew gently, ruffling her hair, but she didn't seem to notice. She was lost in thought, struggling with the weight of the decision before her. Jackson could see the conflict in her eyes, the turmoil that she had been carrying for so long. It was clear that she wanted to change, but the fear of the unknown held her back. I don't know if I can do it, she said quietly, almost to herself. I don't know if I can break free from all of this. You don't have to do it alone, Jackson replied, his voice firm but gentle. You have me and you have humanity. We can help you. We can help you find a way to build something new, something better. Together we can change the empire, but you have to be willing to take that first step. Ziara turned to face him fully, her eyes meeting his. There was a long silence between them, the weight of her decision hanging in the air. Jackson held her gaze, willing her to see the truth in his words. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He knew that her path would be fraught with danger, with opposition from her father, from the Empire, and from those who had always maintained the status quo. But he also knew that change was possible if they fought for it. I'm afraid, Ziara confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm afraid of what will happen if I try to change everything. What if it all falls apart? What if I lose everything, including you? Jackson took a step closer, reaching out to gently grasp her hand. You won't lose me. I'm here, Ziara. I'm here because I believe in you and I believe in what we can do together. But you have to believe in yourself. You have to take that first step, even if it's scary. The future doesn't belong to the past, and it doesn't belong to anyone else. It belongs to you. For a long moment, Ziara didn't speak. She just stood there, her hand in his, her mind racing with possibilities. Finally, she spoke again, her voice more certain this time. You're right, she said, her tone stronger than before. I can't keep living in fear. I can't keep letting my father control me. I have to take control of my own life. I have to fight for what I believe in. Jackson smiled, his heart swelling with hope. He could see the change in her, the shift from uncertainty to determination. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was a start. The first step toward freedom, the first step toward a new future. I'm with you, Jackson said, his voice full of conviction. No matter what happens, I'm with you. Together, we can make a difference. Ziara squeezed his hand, a small but meaningful gesture. Together, she repeated. As they stood there hand in hand, the wind rustling through the courtyard, Jackson couldn't help but feel that, for the first time, there was a real chance for change. The path ahead was uncertain, and the challenges they would face were many. But for the first time since arriving on Zorn, Jackson felt like there was hope. And hope, he knew, was the most powerful weapon they could have. The tension in the Star Empire was at its peak. The Emperor's reign, once unchallenged and absolute, now faced the possibility of collapse. In the heart of the palace, Jackson Riker walked alongside Ziara, his thoughts racing as they neared the royal court. The events that had unfolded in the past weeks had set a course into motion that neither of them could have anticipated. Their conversations, their struggles, and the growing bond between them had changed everything. For the first time, Ziara had stepped into the light of defiance, ready to confront her father, the Emperor, and challenge everything she had once accepted. She had agreed to meet with the Emperor, to speak directly to him about the future of the Empire, and to declare her intentions for a new path. She would not be the pawn of her father's game any longer. Jackson, too, knew that today would be the moment of truth. His role in this was clear. He was there as an ally, as a voice of support for Ziara's vision of a better, more equal galaxy. But the consequences of failure were immense. If they could not convince the Emperor, if the Senate rejected their plea for change, the rebellion would fail, and the Emperor's wrath would be devastating. As they approached the royal chambers, Ziara's demeanor was calm, but Jackson could feel the nerves under her composed exterior. This was not just a meeting with her father. It was the battle for the future of the entire empire. She had spent her life under the shadow of her father's power, but now she was ready to stand up to him. You don't have to do this alone, Jackson said, his voice steady, though his own heart pounded in his chest. Ziara gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile. I know. But I've spent too long being afraid. This time I'm not backing down. As they entered the Emperor's chambers, the atmosphere was oppressive. The room was large, decorated with dark tapestries and alien artifacts, a reflection of the Emperor's power. At the center of the room stood the Emperor himself, a figure of terrifying stature. His eyes were sharp, his face stone cold, as always. But today there was something different in the air, a sense of uncertainty, a crack in the Empire's once unbreakable foundation. The Emperor looked up as they entered. His eyes narrowed when he saw Jackson standing beside Ziara, but he said nothing. Instead, he motioned for them to sit. Ziara took a deep breath, gathering her strength before speaking. "I'm done being a tool for your politics, Father," she said, her voice unwavering. "I've spent my entire life doing what you wanted, playing the part you assigned to me, but no more. I'm here to take control of my own destiny. And I will not allow you to continue ruling through fear and manipulation." The Emperor's eyes flicked between Ziara and Jackson. "You think you can change the course of this empire with your words? Do you think I will simply let you throw away everything I've built?" Ziara stood taller, her voice firm. "I'm not trying to destroy everything you've built, Father, but the empire has become stagnant. It's built on outdated traditions that no longer serve us. The people are suffering, and the galaxy is changing. You failed to see it, but I won't sit by and watch this empire collapse under its own weight. I want to build something better, something that will last, something for everyone, not just the few who sit at the top." The Emperor's expression hardened, but Ziara didn't falter. "I've had enough of being controlled. I'm stepping into the future and I'm taking the empire with me, whether you like it or not." Jackson watched the exchange with a sense of awe. Ziara's transformation was nothing short of remarkable. She was no longer the fearful princess who had been trapped by her father's power. She was a leader in her own right, determined to create a new path. The Emperor remained silent for a long time, his gaze piercing, as if weighing his options. Finally he spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "You think you can change the empire, Ziara? Do you think the Senate will allow this? Do you think they will follow your lead?" Ziara's eyes flickered briefly with doubt, but she quickly regained her composure. "The Senate is divided. Some will support you, but many are growing tired of your rule. They see the cracks, Father, and they know that the galaxy is shifting. The future isn't just yours to control anymore." The Emperor stood up, his immense frame towering over them. "You're playing a dangerous game, daughter. If you turn against me, you will have no place here. You will have no power. You will be nothing." Ziara met his gaze squarely, her chin raised in defiance. "I've never had true power, Father, not as long as you controlled everything. But now I'm ready to build something of my own, and I will not be silenced by fear anymore." The Emperor's eyes flickered with something darker, something that seemed almost like regret, though it was quickly masked. He turned to Jackson then, his gaze cold. "And you," the Emperor said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You are the human who has infected my daughter with these ideas. You've poisoned her mind, and now you expect me to welcome your kind into my empire." Jackson stood tall, meeting the Emperor's glare with calm resolve. "I don't expect anything from you, Emperor. I'm here because I believe in Ziara, and I believe in a future where humanity and the Empire can work together for the good of all. But that future is not one built on oppression and fear. It's one built on trust, equality, and cooperation. That's the future we want to build. You can either be a part of it or you can stand in its way." The Emperor's lips curled into a tight smile. "You think you can change the galaxy with your idealism? You think your human ideas of equality and cooperation have any place in an empire like mine?" Jackson didn't waver. "The galaxy is changing, Emperor. You can either adapt or get left behind." For a long moment, the Emperor didn't speak. The silence was thick, heavy with the weight of what was at stake. Finally, the Emperor broke the silence, his voice low but dangerous. "If you want to challenge me, Ziara, then you will have to do it in front of the Senate. You will have to convince them that your way is the right way. You will have to prove that you have the strength to rule, and if you fail, you will fall, and the empire will fall with you." Ziara stood still, her expression resolute. "I will prove it. I will stand before the Senate, and I will show them that change is possible." The Emperor's gaze hardened. "Very well, but remember this, Ziara, you are my daughter, and if you fail, I will not hesitate to do what I must to protect this empire, even if it means destroying you." Ziara did not flinch. She didn't back down, she simply nodded. "I'm ready." The Emperor's eyes lingered on her for a moment longer, his expression unreadable. Then, without another word, he turned and left the room, leaving Jackson and Ziara alone. As the door closed behind the Emperor, Ziara let out a deep breath, her shoulders sagging slightly. The weight of the confrontation had left her drained, but there was no turning back now. "We did it," Jackson said quietly, his voice full of admiration. "You stood up to him." Ziara gave him a small, tired smile. "It's just the beginning, Jackson. The real battle will come when we stand before the Senate. But for the first time, I feel like I can actually fight." Jackson placed a hand on her shoulder, his eyes filled with determination. "And you're not alone. We're in this together." Ziara nodded. "Together." And in that moment, both of them knew that the fight for the future of the Star Empire and the galaxy was just beginning.